Hello, and welcome to the Allegheny Arts Council's Art on Demand. My name is Bobby Croft, and I'm a local artist and art educator that will lead you through this month's lesson. In this month's lesson, we're going to use paper to create three-dimensional name sculptures. For this project, you're going to need thick drawing paper, either cardstock or poster board will do. You'll need tape, a pair of scissors, a pencil to draw with, and some way to add color to your project. So either markers or crayons would do. Colored pencil would also work for this project. The first step of this project is to create patterns on paper that will then be turned into parts of your sculpture. So for this project, you're going to create, like I said, a number of these patterns. So for my project, I'm basing my sculpture on my name. So I'm spelling out my name using various sheets of paper. So you could do your name, you could do a word, you could even use different symbols if you so desire. However, you're going to create a number of these patterns that will then be turned into your name or into that word. So for this step, you're going to use a sheet of paper, and then using your materials, you're going to create patterns. So a pattern is something that repeats over and over. So for this pattern, I'm going to create almost like a plaid. So I'm going to start with my red marker, and I'm going to go back and forth, creating lines, stripes, and I'm going to crisscross the other direction, the same color. You're going to notice that I'm drawing nice and big. I'm using up the entire paper. The key here is that I'm going to repeat the same pattern on the flip side of the paper. So we're creating a three-dimensional sculpture, meaning that we're going to see both sides of our paper with the final project. So whatever pattern I draw on the front, I'm going to draw on the back. And you may notice that I am not going all the way to the edge of the paper. That's okay, because we're going to be cutting out shapes and letters out of these pieces of paper to create our sculpture. So now I'm going to switch to another color, and you can use whatever colors you want, whatever patterns you want. You can create your own patterns. You can go online and look at different patterns to help you with your project and have fun with it. There's no right or wrong way of doing this. But keep in mind, whatever pattern you create on the front of your paper, you also need to create on the back of your paper. Now I'm going to add yellow. This time I'm going to go the opposite direction. So there I have one pattern done on both sides of my paper. Like I said earlier, you're going to need to make a number of these patterns on various sheets of paper. You can make as many as you want and then pick and choose when you go to create your sculpture, or you can create more later if you need to. For the second step of this project, you're going to draw and cut out various symbols or letters that you'll use for your project. So for my sculpture, I'm using my last name, C-R-O-F-T, and I'm creating letters out of the paper to create my sculpture. So you can do your name, you could use a word, you could use symbols if you desire. So for this step, I'm going to take the patterns that I created on my paper, and using a pencil, I'm going to draw out bubble or block letters or symbols that I could use for my sculpture. Now, the key here is to create symbols or letters that are not too thin. We want nice thick letters so that the paper has some strength when you go to sculpt. If you make the letters too thin, what will happen is that the paper will not have the strength to hold itself up when you sculpt. So, I drew out my C. Now what I'm going to do is use my pair of scissors and cut out the scissors, or this letter using my scissors. So there I have my C, my scrap paper I can recycle. And I'm going to repeat this process with the other letters or symbols that I'm going to use for my project. So you can see here that I have my R, and for the pattern there I use squigglies or a scramble technique. Then I have my O, which I use Dr. Seuss as an inspiration, using zigzags or lightning bolts to create my O. And I have my F. I used polka dots for my F. And then for my T, I used stripes. And then I also created a almost like a paint splatter base. And for this one, I glued it down onto another piece of cardstock to make it nice and sturdy. So there's actually two pieces of paper there. So I glued that down to make a nice sturdy base. So for the last step of your project, you're going to take your individual letters or symbols and you're going to construct them into a three-dimensional sculpture. So for this step of the project, you're going to need Scotch tape and then the symbols or letters that you have created. So to start this project, you might actually need some assistance from a friend or a loved one to get started. But what you'll do is you'll take one of your symbols or letters and tape it to your base, whatever you're using as your base. Now for this, you're not going to tape them flat, you're going to tape them so that you can then stand it up later. Okay, so for this, I'm going to use little pieces of Scotch tape and tape them at angles, almost creating a hinge, so that I can then stand up my letter. Okay, and then I'm going to take my letters and I'm going to figure out a way to make them stand three-dimensionally. Like I said, this can be kind of difficult starting out, so you might need some help from a loved one or a friend to help you play around and figure out how are you going to take these flat letters and tape them so that they are three-dimensional. So this is going to require some experimenting. You can bend or morph or twist the paper if you need to. Just be careful that you don't rip it. And then as you figure out ways to make your project stand, you're going to tape those connections so that they stay three-dimensional. So here, I think I'm going to put the F going through my O, and where the F is touching the base, I'm going to use a little piece of tape. And then where the F is touching the O, let me turn my project around here so you can see. I'm going to put a piece of tape connecting it there. And you might find that as you're building, you're going to have to add extra pieces of tape in certain areas to help it stay three-dimensional or help it stay standing up. Okay, so there I have two of my letters, and I'm going to continue building and adding the rest of my letters to make this a three-dimensional project. And there you have your very own paper sculpture. We really hope you've enjoyed this lesson, and we would love to see the work that you've created. Please take photos of your work and send it to us using the information on the screen. And make sure that you sign in next month when we create animal artworks inspired by the work of Charlene Neild.